And welcome back to part 2 of our special 2-part Watchmen series from right here in Washington, D.C. One of the leading voices here in D.C. when it comes to national security issues, to the Middle East, to the strong U.S.-Israel relationship is the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, or FDD. Now, Jonathan Schanzer is the Vice President for Research at FDD. And folks, if the Middle East is confusing to you, if this complex region kind of seems over your head sometimes, Jonathan Schanzer is your man. Take a look. Tell us where we're at right now with that Iran threat. The U.S. obviously increasing sanctions, seems to be putting more pressure on. Talk about Iran's response, which isn't a pleasant one, I know, and how they continue to try to expand across the region.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, it's important to note that when we got out of the nuclear deal last year, we did so because there were issues that had been unresolved when we had entered into the deal. And notably, that's terrorism, it's the destabilization of regimes across the Middle East, it's the support for the Assad regime in Syria, which has murdered, untold numbers, at least 500,000 according to rough estimates. I mean, nobody knows exactly. On top of that, we've got the cyber activity that we know they're involved in, you've got the human rights violations at home. Things have been bad, and so there was a reason why
the ballistic missile program as well.
Yeah, popping off missiles on a regular basis, still developing them. And so the Trump administration finally made the decision last year to pull out of the deal. The Europeans haven't pulled out, so they have left a lifeline open to the Iranians. But what has happened here is that we have reimposed a lot of those sanctions that we had on Iran in the first place. And so they're beginning to feel the squeeze. Financially, they're beginning to feel more isolated. This is all good news because it means that we're putting more pressure on the Iranians to halt this activity. But in the process, they continue to support the terrorist regimes around the region. And then on top of that, they are now threatening to close off the Strait of Hormuz, which is where something like 40% of the world's oil travels through. So it is, we're still in a standoff with the Iranians. I don't think we have any clarity about where things are going at this moment, but what we do have is a maximum pressure campaign imposed by the Trump administration with the goal of changing Iran's behavior.
Can you talk about how the Iranian regime and its proxy Hezbollah have kind of entrenched themselves along Israel's northern border?
Absolutely. I think the first thing to note here is that the Iranians are establishing what we call a land bridge, Shiite crescent, whatever you want to call it, but it's stretching from western Iran into Syria, through Iraq, into Syria, into Lebanon. And the idea here is so that Iran would have kind of a network of roads where they're able to bring material, basically the things that they need to carry out war against Israel or against others for that matter. And so they have largely succeeded in connecting these roads. So now what they have are two fronts. One that is well established in Lebanon, and that is a front that has about 150,000 rockets facing south at Israel right now. On top of that, there were attempts to build these tunnels that would connect southern Lebanon into Israeli territory. The Israelis have thwarted the tunnel problem. They still have the problem of all these rockets that are facing south at them right now, and it will overwhelm their defenses. They know it.
Even with Iron Dome, this is just too much.
150,000 rockets is a huge number. Think about what 5,000 rockets did back in 2014 and how they were threatening Ben Gurion Airport. Now imagine what that looks like, where you multiply that, by
nightmare scenario.
Nightmare scenario for the Israelis. So that's the one front. The other front is in Syria, and there we've seen actually Israeli strikes. The number that we know of inside Syria has been more than 200 over the last year or so.
Wow.
They have hit primarily missiles and other ordnance that we believe were on their way to Lebanon to augment what was happening inside Hezbollah territory. But also some of this material was designed to create a separate front in Syria to be able to launch a two-front war against Israel from the north. Israelis now no longer talk about the next Hezbollah war. They talk about the next northern war.
You've done a lot of great work on kind of highlighting the radical behavior of President Erdogan of Turkey. This is supposedly a NATO ally, formerly a good relationship with Israel. That seems to have gone by the wayside now. Talk about how Turkey has been really, to say the least, not a positive influence in the region under the Erdogan regime.
I'll take it a step further. I think that Turkey is now the first NATO member that also qualifies as a state sponsor of terrorism. Just to put things in perspective, first of all, you have a presence of Hamas in that country that just simply shouldn't be there. That is the largest external headquarters for Hamas. If you remember the 2014 war between Israel and Hamas, that rocket war, it was launched by the killing of those 3 teens in the West Bank. That was planned and financed out of Turkey. Number 2, look at what's happened in Syria. The ISIS and al-Qaeda problem that has overtaken that country, it is largely due to the lax border policies of Turkey. There is a 550-mile border between Turkey and Syria, and the Turks left it wide open. And then on top of that, you've got the Iran problem that they have going on over there, where they helped Iran evade sanctions. Right at the height of that nuclear standoff that we had between 2012 and 2015, they allowed Iran to move roughly $20 billion worth of cash and gold. That's with a B, billion. That is it is the largest sanctions evasion scheme that we've seen in modern history, and the Turks did this on behalf of the Iranians.
Thanks again to Jonathan Chanzer for joining us. Folks, be sure to check out his great work at FDD. Well, coming up after the break, my final thoughts from right here in Washington, D.C., featuring the one and only Pastor John Hagee. Why should you join us here in D.C. this July? Pastor Hagee has a few thoughts that you'll want to hear. The stakes are high, folks. Stick around.